It was the 15th year after the catastrophe. A lot of things had changed in this city, and few people could find happiness. So today, before our hero, Wang Qiao received disappointing news on the fact that this time they decided to expel his own sister. He couldn't believe his ears. And it was as if he was trying to digest the information he was hearing. Eventually, his anger got the better of him, and he lashed out at the man who had given him the bad news. Exiles were always chosen by a vote, and it couldn't be influenced by just one person. So there was no point in blaming him. The red-haired woman interrupted their argument because it was obvious that Wang Qiao's sister had been kicked out. She was sick with tuberculosis and couldn't do anything useful, so why waste resources on her? Wang Qiao then turned his attention to this arrogant company, whom he had apparently disliked for a long time, and for good reason. Wang Qiao pointed his sword at the so-called boss. But the latter was not scared in the slightest, as he knew that nothing would happen to him and was basically prepared for such a reaction. The anger subsided, and as if having lost all hope, Wang Qiao wanted to at least know where his sister had been left. As soon as he found out that she was in the mountains, he did not stay in hiding for a second longer. He was only followed by laughter devoid of any empathy. The boy wandered through the woods and tried to get a hold of his sister. So far, everything was even. No tracks or sounds, just vegetation. Sis hid behind a tree in the bushes and cried quietly. She loved her brother, and so she did not want to appear in front of him so as not to burden him with her problems. But there was no hiding from his brother, and still his keen eye found his kinsman. And his sister apparently completely forgot that he always wanted hide-and-seek wherever his sister found a hiding place. Before they could even say hello properly, a huge dead man appeared in front of them. The sister immediately pushed her brother away, thus keeping him alive. It was all foregone. Now she was dead, and there was no saving her. Through the tears and such a loss, the anger within him was very hard to hold back. Wang Qiao grasped the sword and wished to take revenge on this dead man who had taken away the person he held dearest to him. Our hero was too weak and lost to the dead man in this fight. But could it have been otherwise? Could he have won? What if Wang Qiao had used the attachment system in time? Maybe the outcome would have been different, in his direction. The loud voice repeated several times already. Wang Qiao! Wang Qiao! People couldn't wake him up. He was only woken up by the nightmare that had ended. Wang Qiao had a lesson, but in a cold sweat he had a hard time figuring out what was going on and how he ended up here. Then he noticed Cheng Deliang, who in his dream had died back at the very beginning of the apocalypse. But here in life, he was alive. The teacher reminded Wang Qiao that the special zone quotas were very valuable. Only awakeners and citizens under the age of 30 could get these quotas. Without a quota, the road to the special zone was closed. What could the special zone be saying? That everything that had happened was not a dream. Wang Qiao went back to the past that he had already lived once before. His system was still in place. It always gave Wang Qiao good clues, and also the system of rewarding attachment and the number of people involved was arranged here. In his past life, Wang Qiao had failed to send his family members to the shelter. His mother had died in the first wave, and his sister. This time, he just had to hit the quota to protect his family members. At the very beginning of the end of the world, Jiang Kun had the advantage of a group of his personal subordinates. Wang Qiao and his sister had to join them, otherwise their chances of survival would be low, as everywhere was dangerous. But this cruel egoist treated the guys like slaves. He beat them and chased them for every little thing. Until one day, the awakening came. That was when Wang Qiao saw their power for the first time and realized that things could be different after all. Now our hero has decided to go to Jian Kun's loan company, and not just for revenge. His old acquaintance had been held hostage by this bandit and was fighting back as best she could. This is where the action was at its thickest. Her father didn't pay Jian Kun the money, and her mother ran away somewhere. And now their daughter was paying for it, and she had to sell her body or else she wouldn't pay the debts. And of course, Jian Kun hated it when people didn't listen to him and tried to resist him. Such a life was out of character for the perky girl. She didn't take the money, but she owed it, and now she was being forced into the business of selling her body. Such injustice was sickening. While she was lying under Jiang Kun's feet, some unexpected guests entered the study. No one even knew or expected Wang Qiao. Of course, he wasn't going to give his name and just called himself a superhero. It seemed as if what Wang Qiao was doing was comparable to madness. Did he really want to face these guys alone? Absolutely. And in addition, after he had dispatched two of them rather quickly, he immediately sneaked to their boss, who couldn't do anything against his strength. Why would a stranger sneak in here and now slowly kill them? Apparently decided to collect his debts. These guys owe him a decent amount for another timeline. Time to pay back former debts. Wouldn't the creditor himself know that? But only Jian Kun, of course, didn't understand anything, as he didn't remember the past. How did everything that was happening even need them to understand, and who was Wang Qiao? Is this what Jian Kun was thinking about? When the enemies were out, Wang Qiao finally turned to the girl who was barely breathing after Jian Kun's beatings. Before answering how she felt, she was more concerned about who Wang Qiao was. Could she trust him? He didn't have time to answer this question, because one of the fallen decided to wake up, which attracted Wang Qiao's attention. He decided to ask where the receipt was, but Jian Kun was just playing dumb and pretending like he didn't understand. Still, maybe he should have thought hard before Wang Qiao would take action. The geezer's brains were working well, and he finally admitted that the receipt was on the table. And beside her was also a knife, which caught Wang Qiao's attention. He gave the receipt to the girl. Now it meant that she didn't owe anything to anyone, and besides, it was a goodwill gesture from Wang Qiao. She could trust him. She hadn't owed a penny in the first place. She tore the sheet as if trying to say goodbye to her past and to those who had brought her to this point. The system notified its master that there was an opportunity to create an attachment together with Zhao Yingyuan. But since she had not awakened, it was impossible for her to obtain the skill. Therefore, Wang Qiao decided to help her awaken this skill first, because now it was time for revenge. Zhao Yingyuan was not a timid girl, and her eyes could be seen thinking the same thing that Wang Qiao guessed. Revenge. It started raining black outside, which was normal for the time when the end of the world was coming. Meanwhile, Zhao Yingyuan was beginning to awaken her ability, which was metal manipulation. This ability was developed in her at rank A. There were ability levels from lowest to highest, E, D, C, B, A, A, S, 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 S. Abilities referred to the 6 basic senses, and abilities above level S were basically dual senses superimposed on each other. The power levels from weak to strong were as follows: storm level, flood level, fire, tsunami, natural disaster, indestructible. The power level was based on the destructive power of the awakened one, and theoretically, provided his powers were properly developed, an indestructible awakened one with rank E abilities could also defeat an awakened disaster awakened one with rank A abilities. Wang Qiao in turn could already accept the S-class ability, which was to detect metals. In his previous life, he had only obtained a rank E ability, because the ability he obtained was too bad, and he ended up barely reaching the peak storm level. But the S-level ability was indeed powerful, and once Wang Qiao awakened, his strength approached the peak storm level. Zhao Yingyuan still noticed something that she was very interested in, but she didn't understand. Why did Wang Qiao have the same abilities as her? Was it somehow related? With a completely innocent smile, Wang Qiao replied that there was a reason why they were the same. This kind of answer not only surprised Zhao, but it was even visible how she was embarrassed by the guy's words. He was really very nice to her. Here, of course, our hero lied a little bit, because it was due to the numerous awards that he received because of the system of attachment. But he could not tell this to the girl, so as not to spoil the impression of their acquaintance. A short while later, it was known that there was a vacancy in the asylum. Zhao Yingyu and Wang Qiao had advanced abilities and unlimited prospects, so they were offered to join the military. This would be the best choice for them, and Wang Qiao decided to think about it. At the beginning of the end of the world, he needs to tie more powerful people to him, so there was no chance of him joining the army. And this world was getting weirder and weirder. Besides, the quota to enter the special zone was very valuable. It would be good for the guys to discuss many things with their family. Zhao jokingly said that she was giving Wang Qiao this quota. The man was slightly angry after all. A place like this couldn't even be bought for $1 billion, so it was valuable. And these teenagers were joking around. In an instant, the two were creating an illusion for the man that the precious seats at the special military base were fading into oblivion. All these reflections vanished under the loud and agonizing scream of some man. He was being chased by a mob of ex-humans, and right now you could tell they were just zombies on them. Zhao Yingyuan didn't even see the differences between these creatures and humans, and thus didn't quite understand why they were biting each other. To prevent these zombies from breaking into the building, we had to stand on defense. But they did not understand any words and continued to break through. The man could not be saved because there was no strength to escape from the hands of the living dead, and who could resist them? These dead people didn't even realize that they were in danger of being shot at. And it's no wonder, because they didn't have minds like they used to. After warning once, the man finally dared to fire, but that only drew the zombies' attention even more. They didn't hold back any longer, and all attacked the shooting man, who was confused and didn't even try to get away somehow. No longer Wang Qiao, who until this moment had held back his emotions and did not participate, could not stand it anymore, and now could not stand by and decided to use all his skills. Wang Qiao's strength was great enough to hit several zombies at once, and to death at that. These zombies appeared before the black rain had even ended. It was earlier than Wang Qiao thought. Our hero had already received a call from his mother. Her son began to worry about her and asked her not to go outside because it was dangerous. But she called him to give him urgent and truly terrible news that turned his world upside down. His beloved sister had been kidnapped by unknown, and that never happened in his previous life either. No one kidnapped his sister. What could it be? The butterfly effect. Wang Qiao decided to take matters into his own hands and quickly started to deal with the zombies to quickly go looking for his sister. He couldn't let anything happen to his sister. He didn't want to tussle with these dead people anymore, and unleashed a multitude of barbs that pierced the zombie bodies to death. Wang Qiao, as far as Zhao Yingyuan understood, possessed the same abilities as her, but he was many times stronger than her. At last, the street was at least a little calmer, and it was safe to move about, for there was protection everywhere. In a short while, Wang Qiao and her companion arrived at her mom's apartment. She immediately met them with a smile on her face. Wang Qiao promised her that he would definitely get his sister back, and as long as he was around, then everything was fine. Well, perhaps these kidnappers left some messages or conditions? Before leaving the house, they taunted their mother and warned Wang Qiao to head to the Chen Yuan building. Otherwise, they promised to kill her. But the mother did not know who the kidnappers were. As a matter of fact, Wang Qiao didn't know who the Jianyuan building belonged to either. But Zhao knew this, and it turned out to be Jiankun's property. And Chen Yuan was Jiankun's half-brother. Wang Qiao really had never seen Chen Yuan in his past life. It constantly seemed to him as if he had died back at the beginning of the apocalypse. It was dangerous here, so the son decided that he would take his mother to a shelter. Wang Qiao now blamed himself for everything that had happened. He felt guilty for relying too much on information from his past life. Did he dare to forget the full brutality of the end of the world? If he wanted to protect his family, he should be more careful in the future. Fortunately, perhaps Zhao Yingyuan knew more about this Chen Yuan than anyone else, and could help make sense of the situation, thus doing a great favor. This was how the defense line of the special zone looked like. This was the safest place. Wang Qiao had one more place, so he decided that once he saved his sister, he would send her here to keep his mom company. Mom really hated to let her son go, but it had to be done. She wished him to be careful, and yet her son was now an awakened one as well, which meant that his strength had increased manifold, and he could withstand any threats that had previously seemed insurmountable. This bunker was a very serious place. No one could pass here without authorization, and everything was strictly checked for the safety of those who were here. The doors closed. Mom was now safe. All that was left for Wang Qiao to do was to find her sister. Zhao Yingyuan didn't understand at all what kind of crazy people these were and why was this rain black, but Wang Qiao couldn't answer her questions either. One thing was clear. It was a living hell. And fortunately, the strength to cope with this hell were. Therefore, Wang Qiao felt confident and could stand up for himself and his companion. In this city, as in any city, you could be attacked from any direction. It was important to always be on guard. And apparently today wasn't the day that things were going to be very easy. The guys' attention was caught by a huge explosion that was as bright as an orange flower. There was a girl running at full speed towards Wang Qiao and Zhao, who had apparently created that explosion. Wang Qiao immediately recognized this girl. Her name was Lu Wo. She was one of the 10 strongest end of the world. Everyone called her the Flame Queen. She could destroy mountains of zombies as if dancing with fire. Lu Wo, the Flame Queen, had always admired other people. She was especially attractive and very strong. When everyone knew her, Wang Qiao hadn't heard of her yet. In the past, she was already in the base of a disaster-level awakened person. Wang Qiao had a poor understanding of ranks and strength size, and thus couldn't imagine how strong she was. The Flame Queen was the strongest elementalist. That's why she was feared and respected, because she could get rid of all enemies at the snap of a finger. No one wanted to antagonize her, and if you get close to her, you can become very strong. This was something Wang Qiao was beginning to understand now. But in the past, she had just passed by for supplies while completing tasks, so he hadn't been able to interact with her back then. But now, he wasn't going to pass up an opportunity like this when it was right in front of him. It was the time for battles, so Wang Qiao had prepared Zhao Yingyuan in advance. But even being prepared, she was a bit shocked. There were especially a lot of zombies here, and it was a great chance to compete on the same team along with Lu Wo. Quite easily, she could order the zombies here to burn, thus setting huge fires. The flames danced around her, creating an impenetrable shield around her. The zombies were stupid to realize what fire or danger was. They ran like blind chickens, and once in danger, they would not stop running. There were too many of them for the fire to work properly, and Lu Wo's strength wasn't enough to cover all the dead. When it seemed to be the end, but Wang Qiao came to the rescue, to which the girl was extremely surprised. He acted very efficiently and quickly destroying the zombies time after time. They had absolutely no chance of survival. The metal pierced into their bodies and left huge holes, after which life was simply impossible. But there are times when the living dead hit you completely unexpectedly. That's when someone else's help might come. Zhao Yingyuan was on backup and managed to protect Wang Qiao from the zombie very timely, crushing him with a huge piece of metal cube. This world, in which they were to live, seemed interesting to the girl. In order to survive, the guys fought back and covered each other. There was no time for unnecessary talk or uncertainty. Any mistake or inattention could cost lives. In the time it took them to kill all the zombies, the guys were tired and extremely glad that it was already over. Luo Wu watched Wang Qiao and Zhao Yingyuan closely, and realized that these two were strong enough that one could assume as if they were both at the peak of the storm level. The girl looked confused, so Wang Qiao wondered if she was all right, especially since the frequent use of elemental force could be exhausting. She admitted that she was fine, and then it was the perfect moment to get to know each other better. The possibility of binding with Luo Wu had finally been achieved. Wang Qiao was now closer to becoming a truly strong person, capable of overcoming any obstacles in his way. The system also rewarded him for this achievement with a 5th-grade psychic ability called Ignition. At the end of it all, thin female fingers bloodied with someone else's blood drew on the dead man's face. In this manner, Zhao Yingyuan was amused, as if it was her puppet. While Wang Qiao was watching all of this, he felt a pleasant, warm sensation that enveloped his hand. He realized something and walked away, asking him to wait for the girls at the spot. Zhao Yingyuan was so engrossed that she didn't even notice him leaving. He decided to go to a store or a cafe. Turns out he was ready to absorb the new power that lurked in that empty space. This power filled his every cell, as if something warm and empowering was flowing through his body at the same time. It didn't even feel uncomfortable, but rather a fierce bliss. The new ability was fully accepted. Wang Qiao was able to control several items in a row that were created from metal. But beyond that, there was another very weighty ability that complemented the first. Its Ignition! The two abilities were indeed very suitable for each other. Wang Qiao should have already been at the flood level. And indeed, the early flood stage was simply an incredible system. The artifact created was even convenient. It could always be had on one's arm like a bracelet. He also decided to take a small box with him that might be useful. Zhao Yingyuan continued to mock the corpse all this time. And Lu Wu couldn't understand what she was doing, and what kind of hobby was this. She finally finished painting this poor dead guy and it turned out to be such a masterpiece. It was a perfect example of a talented makeup artist. Zhao Yingyuan was so pleased with the work that she even offered to paint the same on Luo Wu, but she refused for some reason. Finally, they decided to talk business. Lu Wu was surprised to see the two of them out here on the street, because it was dangerous and it was better to stay home. But in fact, Lu Wu was not at home in dangerous places either. With sadness, she recognized that she had become separated from her teammates. Zhao Yingyuan explained that they were also here for a reason, because Wang Qiao's sister had been kidnapped, and now they were on their way to rescue her. Whether Luo Wu was so impressionable or she was really upset that someone's sister had been kidnapped, she couldn't even control her emotions. It was so sad for her. Wang Qiao and Zhao were planning to go to Chenyuan Mansion, and Luo Wu had just come from the other side. Maybe she knew what was going on there. She didn't know what was going on in that mansion, but one thing she knew for sure was that the streets were full of zombies. Was it really that bad? How were they supposed to get in there? Lu Wu had separated from her company, and now made the decision for herself to go along with her new acquaintances. This, of course, Wang Qiao was very surprised after all. The girl herself was heading for the abyss of all calamities. And why? Lu Wu was still strong enough and wouldn't be a burden to them. Besides, she felt it was her duty to save this girl. Wang Qiao tried to ask what she meant by her duty, but there was no answer. She referred everything to the fact that it was as if the guy had misheard her. What was Luo Wu hiding? Wang Qiao in turn decided to use the box by giving it to the girl. This box contained lipsticks of great colors. Zhao wouldn't always use the same color. But it was better to put on makeup later, because now they had to go. This is how Wang Qiao was able to gather a good company, but will they become his faithful companions? As they walked, the black rain stopped. But as for these zombies, no one knew if they would be able to return to normal or not. The overjoyed people did not know that after the black rain stopped, the real beginning of the catalytic period of the end of the world came. There were several of these periods and monsters, and their order was from low to high. First is the catalytic period, the period of gestation, the period of growth, the period of maturity, the period of polarity change, and last is the period of true personality. Alternate levels in an awakened person. Storm, flood, fire, tsunami, disaster, and indestructible. Now zombies, just survivors of the catalytic period. Wang Qiao had to get his sister out of there and take the shelter before the situation worsened. There was silence everywhere and not a single person, even though the building was so huge. No one had any idea which floor Chen Yuan and his accomplices usually hid on, as they always acted extremely cautiously and conspiratorially. So the guys had no choice but to go to the top floor and then go lower. Well, in the elevator they got a pleasant surprise they apparently didn't expect to see. The first zombie immediately attacked our hero, but he was unusual. He had fangs instead of the usual teeth, which can be seen in other zombies. It was all very close, but fortunately during this time, Wang Qiao was able to develop a reaction in battle, and the current flaming sword will do the job just fine. Wang Qiao covered the girls in front while they dealt with the dead behind. So far, everything has remained under complete control, and they have handled every difficulty that has arisen perfectly, showing cohesion and confidence in their abilities despite the pressure. The strength was enough to take down several zombies at a time. It would be a great experience for future fights. The zombies were already so boring to everyone that killing them was no pity. The other zombies died in the flames that Luo had created. Zhao Yingyuan recognized that her ally was too hot for this world. Lu Wo, of course, reciprocated. After all, Zhao was also quite good. All the zombies were well burned, but surprisingly they were still very strong, and it was getting harder and harder to contain them each time. I had to use heavy artillery and create an explosion. This fire blast put down several zombies at a time. Well, unfortunately, it didn't catch all of them. Zhao was already used to such explosions, but Luo didn't know what the real aesthetics of killing was yet. Zhao Yingyuan was also a pro at the same thing, unable to display excellent explosion skill. The Flame Queen was still very young now and didn't have much experience in battle. Instead, Zhao Yingyuan fought in full force. She had probably just awakened and was just as twisted as she was in her previous life, as far as Wang Qiao remembered her. It seemed as if all the zombies had already been destroyed and it was possible to get through and beyond. But on our guys ran another crowd, as if they were released from some cage and they were eager beasts of food ready to pounce on their prey. There was no more time. Something had to be decided urgently, and so Wang Qiao told the girls to enter the elevator first. He glued something like chips to their bodies, but it seems to work more like a magnet, and with his power, he could control those chips and send the girls on a safe flight accordingly. Wang Qiao was left alone with the crowd of living dead. What the hell was he doing? Did he really believe in his own strength? I think he was well aware of the desperate step he was taking. And yet as soon as he managed to gather his thoughts and strength, he unleashed his full potential. Piles of rocks collapsed from the ceiling, and on top of that, huge metal stakes emerged from the floor, which impaled the bodies of these zombies on themselves. While the elevator was still covered in piles of rocks, Wang Qiao managed to run in. Lu couldn't understand what was wrong with this world. Suddenly, when the black rain stopped, there were more crazy people. And this was completely at odds with what the Bureau had previously suggested. The question then arose, could this have been a trap that Jianyuan had set? But more than anything else, Wang Qiao was thinking about his sister, whether she was safe than whether it was a trap. After all, Jian Kun's previous life didn't have Jianyuan's brother. Did he really die in his previous life? Our hero is not very timely, but warned the girls that he accelerated the elevator. It went up with incredible speed. The girls did not even have time to grasp anything, but for sure reached with a breeze. Welcome to the 12th floor. There seemed to be a lot more zombies here, and they all had a lot more abilities than normal zombies. It was as if they could feel other people approaching them, and immediately they stood waiting for the elevator to open. The noise was so frightening that Lu Wo couldn't stand it and crouched down out of fear, hoping it would somehow save her. Zhao Yingyuan didn't support her mood and kept joking around. Did Lu Wu imply the noise she had just made with her scream? But no, Lu really felt as if she had actually heard a bang. And panic wasn't out of nowhere, for an unexpected guest had indeed shown up at their elevator. This monster landed right in front of them, but what did it want? None of the boys had even seen the creature. Wang Qiao began to think of something without the past and realized something. It was a period of growth, the next phase that was approaching the end of the world. Well, how come zombies are so early in their growth period? Things were different in the past. So what is it about the present that influenced this? There was no time to think about it. It was urgent to get out of the elevator, because it was too narrow and it was very easy to die or get trapped. Finally, they got out and managed to keep a little distance between the zombies, which increased their chances of winning. But this zombie was not so easy and managed to jump to the guys with absolute ease. Lu Wo decided to take the initiative to protect everyone, using her element of fire. The fire was powerful, but the zombie's clawed paw snaked through that fire as if its skin was a defense against all elements. Noticing how confused his ally was, Wang Qiao immediately rushed towards the zombie to fight back. After all, his paw was about to hit Lu Wo. The girl meanwhile had a brief shock, but seemed fine, though her whole life almost flew in front of her. Now it was Zhao Yingyuan's turn to fight back decisively. Admittedly, she did so with a special pleasure and confidence, savoring every moment of her victory. She was getting more and more advanced at manipulating metal, and each time she got better at it. This time she managed to crumple a whole ball of metal from the whiskers. That kick she called a lucky jump. But somewhere there in her head, Lu Wo thought that Zhao definitely had the wrong idea about jumping. Meanwhile, in the same building, a man was also fighting against zombies. He heard the sounds of our guys fighting that huge zombie, but thought maybe someone had come from the bureau. The man didn't understand at all what all the fuss was for. Didn't the leader say that the other team needed to be in the shadows? The attempts to defeat the zombie were even, and another tactic had to be taken, because the zombie was too strong. Therefore, Wang Qiao suggested just getting out first. Actually, they did, but the zombie still kept looking for them and running in their direction. It seemed as if this stunt only made it angrier. The situation was heating up, and because it couldn't be controlled, Zhao Yingyuan felt a bit more confused than she had been at the beginning of the battle. He smashed everything, and any defense Zhao put up with his metal was just useless, like a piece of paper. Wang Qiao was just as confused as the girls, because he had never thought that he would have to face the zombies of the growth period again so soon, and also lose his sister. If the present had changed again, Wang Qiao was also not the same old boy. He wasn't as weak as he had been in his previous life. Now he was more confident and knew what he needed. As expected, the adult zombie's body was much stronger, so our hero had to use his power differently. He decided to use his fist instead of a sword, and hit with all his might using the fire element. Even the Flame Queen herself couldn't have imagined that the power of flames could be used in such a way. This young man's skills impressed her more and more. But even so, the zombie still wasn't killed. His hand had once again emerged from the flames and wasn't even burned at all. Wang Qiao was convinced that this monster had taken a lot of damage, but even so, it should have been at least a little weaker. But no, it was much stronger. Even if this monster was still strong, this time Wang Qiao was not alone either. His faithful companions who always helped him in critical moments were fighting with him. They managed to combine their forces, and with that, still deliver a controlling blow to the zombies. A huge metal stake was stuck into the zombie's body, but it wasn't enough. The girls still continued to hold the blow and tried to aim for the heart. After all, even during his growth period, it was his heart that remained his weakness, and this was something he had to be bold enough to exploit. It was now apparent that the zombie was significantly weakened, and it was unlikely that it could do as much damage as it had originally. Apparently there was another surprise. The power of maturity included transformation, which the zombie actually took advantage of. Lu Wo didn't understand what was going on with this zombie, but Zhao swept up what was perfectly suited to paint it. The current strength our hero possessed did not allow him to deliver a control strike to finally kill the zombies, and yet he did not stop his battle. But the man who finally came to the source of the noise was of a completely different opinion, for he found this zombie to be simply hilarious. Lu Wo was familiar with Captain Lian Jinzhou, and he didn't understand why she was here. The girl decided not to explain and asked him for help to deal with this zombie. After all, Captain Lian possessed the awakened flood level. This guy didn't look like any of the crazy people that Lian Jianzhou had dealt with before. He saw that this zombie was wearing gear. Could it be that he had just returned from a Komiskan? Of course the guys warned the captain about how dangerous that zombie was. But that didn't stop his gambling personality at all. After all, he liked breaking hard things the most. And these Comic-Con guys were really tough nuts, as Lian Jian could call them. But now it would be decided who was the stronger of the two. Lian Jian struck blow after blow, trying to hit his opponent at his vulnerable spots. His armor cracked, but the zombie himself was still able to keep fighting and apparently didn't even think about retreating. And this was the perfect chance to attack his heart. Wang Qiao simply could not afford to miss such a chance. The next move the boys gave to the girls, who couldn't wait for their turn to pummel this zombie. It seemed as if Wang Qiao was joking, because here Lian Jian was on the verge of death, and his head could simply be bitten off. But just in time, the girls managed to stand up for Lian Jian. This zombie was thrown a distance away from Captain Liang, and it was also starting to bleed, which was already visible progress. And now was the perfect time to get into the heart of this monster. This ambo had taken so much energy and time from the guys. It was a pleasure to kill it. Without any doubt, Wang Qiao thrust his sword deeper and deeper into the monster's heart. His hand didn't even tremble. After all, they wouldn't have gotten a second chance. But luckily it all came to an end. The zombie finally died. Even when his heart was no longer beating, the fire still couldn't incinerate his body. At the end of the fight, Lian Jian appreciated the fighting skills of our hero, because he was quite a good fighter and strategist. Wang Qiao was just happy that this fight was finally over. But someone was suffering that her face was ruined, and she wouldn't be able to put on good makeup. After the fight was over, Luo noticed that Captain Liang was too impulsive, because he was about to lose his life. But according to him, the girl underestimated him, because he was just warming up. It was time for Wang Qiao to still meet Captain Liang, whom Luo was familiar with. The girl was pleased to introduce her acquaintance to her new friend. The men shook hands, called their name, and were clearly pleased with the acquaintance. But Lian Jianzhou's name was unfamiliar to Wang Qiao. Still, this man had not weak strength and was worth tying up if possible. Unfortunately, to tie Lian Jianzhou Wang Qiao to himself was not successful. Apparently, this guy's heart was much more wary than his appearance would suggest. However, Lian Jian suggested that our hero should fight together sometime, as their strength levels were almost the same. Wang Qiao gladly agreed. Lu felt that now was the time to notify the Bureau of what had happened. Even though the black rain had stopped, but those zombies were still as before and did not return to human form. It turned out that the Bureau already knew about it. But what was going on here Lu couldn't understand, because all those people who were zombies weren't people for a long time and nobody knew if they would be able to return to their previous life. Wang Qiao decided to jump into the conversation, because he didn't understand what the guys meant when they talked about the Bureau. Lu Wo felt embarrassed, as if she had given away a secret. Still, the captain thought it was all right to tell the Bureau. In this situation, the Bureau's secrecy program had long been exhausted. It turns out Captain Lian and Lu Wo were employees of the Special Security Bureau of the official organization designed to regulate civil awakenings. In short, it was just a special security service that kept order among the awakened people. But even about this bureau, Wang Qiao had heard nothing about it, and was not at all surprised that there was any official regulation of awakened ones. The captain felt that it had to be after all, for not every awakened person is mentally stable, and supernatural forces were seriously altering a person's consciousness, and this could pose a danger. Special Security Bureau. Wasn't this the predecessor of the Sixth Sense Society? Wang Qiao didn't know that the Sixth Senses Society was related to this. He couldn't believe that they were created before this zombie apocalypse. And the Flame Queen Luo Wo, wasn't she a member of the Sixth Senses Society? Wasn't she a member of the Sixth Senses Society from the beginning? As Captain Liang went up to this floor, he no longer noticed the people in this building. There were only zombies. Zhao Yingyuan continued her endless attempts to put beauty on this zombie face, and became completely frustrated when nothing worked. When it reached Wang Qiao's consciousness that there was not a single person in the building, he was scared to death for his sister. Without a word, he turned and walked away, completely immersed in his thoughts. Apparently, he didn't want to be followed, so he didn't even deign to explain where he'd gone. And he didn't know where he was going either. He just went into the first office he could find, where there were people everywhere, but dead. Because he had been reborn, his sister had gotten into trouble first, and now Wang Qiao blamed himself for it. He realized what a foolish thing he had done when he decided to follow his previous memories, while he changed the current events. His gaze was fixed on the body of a girl who had the same hair as his sister. Tears flowed from his eyes. Was his sister dead? But before getting completely upset, one had to at least look at her pale face. Wang Qiao was terrified when he saw that girl. Thank God it wasn't his sister. She and the others must have left before the place fell. Luo Wu had already thought that Wang Qiao had found his sister, but there was no trace at all. In that case, the girl considered it a good sign, and a chance that the girl was still alive. The brother had absolutely no idea where his sister could be, and after all, the building was so big. But maybe the new acquaintance knew where his sister was? Lian Jian explained that the alien energy vibration of the awakened flood level had appeared here earlier, which was why he had come here to investigate it. If Sister Wang Qiao was in this building, she was most likely with the awakened one. Such knowledge offered some hope, and Wang Qiao was even slightly relieved. In addition, Captain Liang had the ability to track the awakened one directly through the navigator. Meanwhile, in the same building, something terrible was going on that even an enemy could not wish for. The man was defiantly frozen in front of everyone, as if they were trying to intimidate the others and show them what would happen if they disobeyed. This guy made sure everyone behaved normally and didn't run away from him. All these people are his hostages and very valuable material. It was enough for the man to simply squeeze a piece of ice. As the whole man collapsed, and along with the ice crumbled into many pieces of ice floes, Sulan admitted that he felt very hurt and annoyed every time he broke one of these people. Finally, the scientists came and informed Mr. Sulan that the experimental equipment was ready. In that case, he couldn't wait to get ready for the start. All the test subjects in this room were simply twisted by their hands and led into the room so that they would not escape. Suddenly, Sulan remembered Yin Zhen, who wasn't around, but she was on the second floor. This girl was lazy in Sulan's opinion, so he decided to go looking for her himself and entrusted the rest to his professionals. None of these people had any idea what was going to be done to them here, but one thing was clear, definitely nothing good for them. Screaming was pointless, and she just prayed for help while she was immobilized. Finally, the navigator brought our company to the right place where the vibes were breaking off. This was where the awakened ones were located. Wang Qiao was excited to find his sister. The huge hall was empty, doubts creeping up as to whether anyone was even here. But even if the guys didn't believe Captain Liang, they had to believe in science. Judging by the amount of dust on the tables and everywhere else, it seemed as if the place had not been inhabited for a long time. Li Yanjin was surprised by this fact, as he had expected that there would still be people here. But after all, it was necessary to explore the area a bit. The mysterious awakened ones, coupled with the previous growth period zombies and the special security bureau that seemed to have been prepared for it. It seems that when the zombie apocalypse came, many events happened that Wang Qiao didn't even realize. Our hero could believe that Li Yanjin was still hiding something else important. The guys had already searched every crevice, but they hadn't found anything. And yet the navigator said otherwise. But could these awakened ones have been in heaven or earth if they were not in the room? This question gave food for thought. But everything had to be considered before doing anything. Wang Qiao then decided that the awakened ones must have been underground because they definitely couldn't be in the sky. It is quite possible that such a building could have had a basement where they would hide and hold hostages. But there was no time to think about it, so Li Yanjin decided to just find out. It wouldn't be any worse anyway. With all his might, he simply slammed his fist into the concrete floor, which sent rocks and concrete spilling out. The men sitting in the damp room trembled in fear at their unknown future. They didn't know what these people wanted from them or why they were being held here. The kidnappers were so sure that their hostages would not escape that they didn't even use handcuffs. They just kept them in fear. But suddenly, all their conversations stopped because of a huge crack in the ceiling, and the ceiling collapsed. As it turned out, according to the theory, there really was something down there. Li Yanjian carelessly rubbed his hand, which he used to punch out this hole as if he was hitting a pear. It turned out that brunette man was Qian Yuan, who was immediately recognized by Zhao Ying Yuan. He was very surprised that someone knew him, and said all this in a shaky voice. So intimidated was he by the whole situation. But how could one not know him? This person kidnapped Wang Qiao's sister and ordered her to come here personally, which Wang did. Our hero already wanted to attack the kidnapper, but a bolt of lightning flew right in front of him. And on the other side, there was a huge boulder flying at Captain Liang, which was about to run him over. But thanks to his refined reaction, he spotted it and kicked it like a soccer ball. To think that this man kicked a stone several times his size with just 1 foot in flight. Sneak attacks were never welcomed, the kind of people Lian Jianzhou always called rats. This was Sulan's way of testing how strong his opponent was. It was nothing personal, and one should be used to such sneakiness. Sulan and Yinjing were flood-level peak awakened, and of course they tried to hide themselves carefully, so that the Bureau wouldn't stumble upon them. But still, that time had come. Sulan's filthy mouth was very stinky, and Lianjin suggested to rinse his mouth first. Qian Yuan immediately made it clear that it was those people who had taken Wang Qiao's sister away, and he actually had nothing to do with it. In that case, Wang Qiao began to ask these awakened ones about it. Yes, only when he mentioned his sister, Sulan twisted as if he meant the material. It didn't matter though, because she must be dead by now. Wang Qiao, as soon as he heard the news that his sister was now dead, he was numb, as if he hoped that it wasn't true. But did even now, when he had been given another opportunity, he failed to change fate, and she again. Sulan hurriedly gave a little cheer that the guys had arrived in time and they would be able to retrieve her body. The fire was raging in the body of not only Wang Qiao, but also Lu Wo. For some reason, she was especially determined to save this girl. And now that she found out that she was gone, it seemed as if she was ready to incinerate all the enemies around her. But apparently she should have gotten in line to do it. With all her might, Zhao Yingyuan flew at Su Lan, wishing that bastard to go to hell. "Oh, but what kind of violence is he?" said the rapist. Unfortunately, Zhao Ying'an was unable to pierce his metal through the thick ice of the awakened one, and it simply stuck. The girl had to admit that Su Lan's defense was quite strong. But what an ungrateful damsel. Su Lan was trying to be a worthy opponent, by the way. Turns out it wasn't just defense, but offense as well. How ratty it was after all. The battle was heating up, for Lian Jianzhou, who possessed a level 4 Blood Berserk level a class skill, was entering. But just as he wanted to do something about it, he noticed someone's hands holding his feet right out of the ground. Captain Lian had fallen right under the ground, and how to help him was unclear. Meanwhile, Zhao Yingyuan continued to fight this unequal battle. Metal against ice. Who would win? She made up for her weakness of strength compared to the awakened one by her ability to improvise in combat. And right now, she was ready to slice through that fucking shell of ice to make a huge hole on Su Lan's body. This time the opponent failed to prepare and he fell into the lower basement. But immediately, in those clouds of dust beside Zhao Yingyuan, someone's silhouette could be seen standing beside her. Had she lost? The ice sword was stuck into her stomach. She began to bleed. But even so, she continued to sneer at her enemy. He had just fallen into a trap, and now it was time for revenge. Zhao Yingyuan had purposely brought this scumbag out, so that Wang Qiao would have time to avenge everything. Right now, there was no time to think about it. No matter how bad it was, Wang Qiao just had to do it. But while he was running towards Su Lan, he was spotted by Yin Zhen. Turns out she was very friendly and eager to meet Wang Qiao. And before taking revenge on Su Lan, Wang Qiao will have to deal with Yin Zhen, who was also eager for battle. Only it seems that Su Lan was not happy that his companion was prying into his battle. Quite quickly, his fervor subsided, for he had fallen into a trap from Zhao Yingyuan. And when the victim was trapped, the moment had come when the decisive blow had to be struck. And this honor was allowed to be done by Wang Qiao. As soon as Su Lan realized that these two wanted to kill him, he immediately reflexively created an ice shield that covered his entire body from being hit. It was a battle of the elements, with Wang Qiao controlling fire trying to defeat the Ice King. As you could see, all of this was happening in the air, and thanks to the fact that they were being held by Zhao Yingyuan. Not every time it was harder for her to do so. It was very dangerous for her to continue this fight, because she was bleeding heavily. And if she didn't stop bleeding, she could die. Despite all of Luowo's concern, Zhao tried to keep her head down and kept saying that she was fine. As soon as her ice straightened out, Zhao once again tried to attack the enemy. Except she didn't hit, even though she was very close and could practically kill the asshole. It was very frustrating, because the fight was becoming more difficult even though Su Lan was still in the restraints. Meanwhile, Captain Lian was also fighting for his life. He was submerged in the ground, and it was getting harder and harder for him to breathe. Evari only scoffed evilly at him, for they had been oppressed before. But it had become somewhat of an advantage, for they had adapted to life underground. Awakened Evari knew how to control the earth. It was his element, and he felt like a fish in water. But Lian Jin had a hard time, despite his excellent training. And as long as Lian Jianzhou's body didn't rot, he could enjoy the tranquility of life underground. The battle between Su Lan and Wang Qiao was still ongoing, and the former was finding it very difficult, having to transform into a different hypostasis. With this ice-like appearance in place of skin, Su Lan was much stronger than before. Now that he was confident of his victory, Wang Qiao was still thinking about what he should do in such a case. Evari was surprised on his return that his colleagues were still here. Su Lan was going crazy as usual, but his allies had gotten used to it. Although the strength was not leveled between them, and Su Lan in terms of strength in this battle was clearly stronger and more experienced, Wang Qiao did not even think of retreating. What kind of rookie was it that decided to throw away his weapon in the middle of a fight? Wang Qiao had done a very risky thing, but this risk was apparently justified, for the weapon had already engulfed the enemy's body. It was a trap. Su Lan had fallen for it once again and had foolishly failed to anticipate it. The weapon did its job, spinning around Su Lan's body like a boomerang, and thus creating huge explosions. In this battle, Su Lan lost his arm and had a very hard time dodging to avoid losing another body part. But in the end, he still managed to catch the fire weapon. It was very close again, but that slug once again managed to twist away and not die. Well, he's lucky. But no matter how it was, Wang Qiao felt obligated to get rid of this madman as soon as possible. But before he could reach Su Lan, he was blocked by Evari. Wang Qiao unfortunately did not have time to avoid this blow, so it hit him right in the right arm. which was not very pleasant, but it could have been worse. And when he tried to run away after all, he was struck by the lightning that Yin Zhen had directed at him. How could they not be ashamed? At least they could adhere to some rules in battle. As soon as one couldn't win, these scum immediately attacked Wang Qiao in a mob. But this was very naive on the part of the girls, for these people had no honor. After losing his arm and having a deep wound in his abdomen, Su Lan still continued to live and realized an unexpected thing. Wang Qiao was an awakened person who possessed two powers, which was not a bad thing. Wang Qiao in turn concealed the ability to control metal to keep the enemy in suspense. Afterward, he wanted to kill it with a single strike, but Su Lan managed to block it. This slug also had two accomplices. Apparently they possessed the ability of electricity and earth element. Avari had dragged Lian Jian underground. And now that Zhao was injured and Luo couldn't adapt to this stage of the fight, the only one who could still fight was Wang Qiao. And even if he was alone against the three, he wanted to avenge his sister by killing them. Avari suddenly noticed something strange beneath the ground, like some kind of mole was digging. But it wasn't a mole, and Lian Jianzhou still managed to get out of the ground and grabbed onto Avari's throat. Captain Lian had enjoyed the tranquility quite enough, and was now not averse to happily punching this freak in the face. There was a pile of dust, and also all sorts of incomprehensible debris from this massacre. So strong was Lian Jianzhou's revenge. In the end, Avari disappeared like a rat. Well, we have to admit that for a rat he was pretty fast. Eventually, he made his way through the ground to his own, where he tried to catch his breath after the carnage. Lian Jianzhou had beaten him up pretty badly, which he even admitted, not shying away from appearing weak. Wang Qiao and Lian Jian were just on a roll and could fight, but now side by side to finally skin these rats together. To his surprise, Wang Qiao only noticed how he and Lian Jianzhou had become comrades in arms, and the ability to communicate was achieved. For this, the system issued a rank A ability, Bloody Berserk. This was what Lian was actually capable of. Each side stood in their own group, keeping their distance from each other, but none of them tried to break that distance. The evacuation was almost complete, and Yinzhen urged Su Lan to hurry up and prepare for the removal. But he was just building up his arm, and clearly didn't want to obey his ally. But Yinzhen was persistent. She realized that her ally was not himself and needed to be taken away by force. After all, he would definitely not calm down now. The woman ordered Avari to get Su Lan out of here, and the other guy was to let the crazies out. And to catch these maniacs, Su Lan, his allies, had spent a lot of effort. But they were just dead crazies that could always be found. Avari and Su Lan weren't going to linger here any longer, and rolled into the ground, to a safer place for them. Lian Jian and Wang Qiao were just setting up for battle, and were not going to let these rats go after all. Just a little more and they would be able to destroy them. Yinzhen stayed with them to hold them off while her allies escaped. She sent ball lightning bolts in the guys' direction, which they successfully dodged. Initially it seemed as if Yinzheng missed, but it seems she had a different plan. This ball of lightning she aimed at the ceiling to blow a hole right above the girls. Rocks sprinkled from the ceiling and there was no point in running. Luo tried as much as she could to cover Zhao Yingyu on. But that wasn't all. Yinzhen used her lightning like a flash, and the guys didn't quite cover their eyes in time and were blinded for a while. Yinzhen apparently didn't want to attack the guys heavily, only to distract them so that she could eventually escape herself. Once Wang Qiao and Lian Jianzhou came to their senses, then they realized that their girls were in danger. There were a lot of stones here and it was difficult to understand where the girls were. And in addition, the dust did not give a normal look at everything. Luo already thought she was dead under those piles of rocks. But no, she was protected by the metal frame that held all the rocks together. How long was Luo going to keep pretending to be dead? Luo had completely forgotten that Zhao was controlling the metal. Zhao Yingyu in turn, was touched by the way Lu jumped on her to save her. Yet she was still in her way when she was on top of her. Zhao Yinyu held onto that metal frame with her last strength. The wound in her abdomen was making itself felt, and the girl continued to bleed. She wouldn't admit that she wasn't feeling well. She kept saying she was fine, but Lu was still very worried and didn't know how to help her. And finally, I think the girls have been found. To make the guys realize exactly where they were, Lu started screaming. Hearing the girls scream, the guys stopped searching and could finally get them out. It was an easy thing to do, especially with Wang Qiao's strength. Qianyuan continued to sit with his assistant in the corner and trembled with fear, for he had absolutely no idea what he had gotten himself into and how he could save himself now. Eventually, the deputy suggested running away from here. The hallway was just quiet, so why don't they get out of here? It was a good decision, so they decided to get out of that building quietly. Wang Qiao didn't want to leave everything as it was and find those rats after all. But Lian Jian wasn't sure if he would be able to find them again. But judging by the navigator, these guys didn't go far, but stopped somewhere nearby. And it seems they stayed still in the place and weren't going to run away. Lian Jian heard some noise from the corridor, so the guys decided to go there and check, and the girls were asked to wait here for a while. Chen Yuan's escape was unsuccessful, for they went to a not-so-safe place, where they were immediately smelled by the monsters. The aide again pitched the idea to his boss, to run back to the awakened ones, for there they would be saved. But it seems Chen Yuan had another idea that seemed much better to him. He just threw his assistant to these monsters. Wang Qiao and Lian Jian saw all this, and Chen Yuan ran to them like an innocent sheep. They weren't going to rush into battle with these zombies. Why waste their strength? Chen Yuan immediately started asking for Wang Qiao's help to save him from those cannibals. And in return, he was willing to do anything. But what was the reason Wang Qiao shouldn't have killed him? Was there even one reason? Chen Yuan admitted that perhaps Wang Qiao's sister, perhaps she was not dead. The conversation was getting more and more tense, and Wang Qiao tried to find out as much as he could. Any information about his sister was important to him. Turns out Sulan said that they were some valuable experiments, and his sister was taken away right after Wang Qiao came. So there was a chance that she was still alive. And if Wang Qiao spared Chen Yuan's life, he could promise a lot of money. Chen Yuan was still a normal person, and Lian Jianzhou urged Wang Qiao not to kill him after all. It was simply against the law. But was he really a normal person? Certainly not in Wang Qiao's eyes. This bastard hasn't been human for a long time. Whatever Chen Yuan offered, Wang Qiao didn't fall for it and didn't want any wealth from him. Chen Yuan was killed, burned alive, and Lian Jianzhou didn't understand why he had done it. There was no explanation. Wang Qiao suggested to move on. After all, the awakened ones were Lian Jian's target, and if they were here for too long, they would probably escape. It was all a secret, and thus Lian was surprised how Wang Qiao had guessed everything. Still, he was initially close to believing the lies about the psychic wave investigation, until he saw how the other party treated them when he saw them. The four of them, awakened, suddenly burst into the other party's base, but the other party was not surprised in the slightest, but instead looked as if they had been preparing for this. And from the looks of it, Lian lied about helping to save his sister, because he wasn't even sure if they had his sister. Lian knew the situation on the other side and knew that he couldn't defeat them alone, so he wanted to use Wang Qiao's sister as an excuse to drag him with him to this place. But Lian wasn't actually lying. When he couldn't find Wang's sister's body, he assumed that it had simply been kidnapped by this group. And as it turned out, that was indeed the case. Lian Jianzhou was even willing to share some information about this group, but it was impossible right now, as they would be very busy. They got into a tough fight with the zombies and spared no one who stood in their way. Wang Qiao decided to continue using his metal ability. After all, it was especially effective against zombies. And from the outside it looked quite effective, because at a time you could destroy several monsters at once and still remain under the protection of the wall. Watching this, Lian Jian thought to himself that the stranger's strength was pretty awesome. Eventually these zombies decided to run away for some reason, even though this was not usually characteristic of their behavior. Wang Qiao didn't want to let them go, so he immediately rushed after them and asked Lian Jian to stay here. Apparently, they headed straight for the girls, where Lu Wo was trying to create a defense. Zhao could tell that the way the girl used her ability wasn't that original, but there was no time to discuss it now. There were too many of these zombies, and Zhao wasn't sure if she could hold them off. And if she couldn't, she and Zhao would just die. But Zhao Yingyuan decided to support her friend and told her not to worry, because Wang Qiao would be back soon. She said it as if she knew it for sure. How could she be so sure? Probably because she compared him to a superhero. He always came to her rescue in time. By then, Lian Jian had pulled up and continued to scatter the zombies. He suggested that the guys leave first, while he himself decided to hold off the zombies and catch up with them afterward. Actually, no one wanted to linger. After all, these zombies were like annoying flies. They always attacked the guys in droves and wouldn't let them pass. Even if they escaped, the zombies always knew where they would be. Wang Qiao thought that these maniacs, it was as if they were slowing down the guys in an organized manner. Or in Liang's opinion, it was quite possible that they were just gradually starting to come to their senses. But Wang Qiao was certain that the process of becoming a zombie was not reversible, and only by entering the 5th stage could one regain sanity and consciousness. Or alternatively, someone could have manipulated the zombies. He remembered the stories around the campfire as he and his sister were told about the codename Zombie King. He was an awakened disaster-level person, and he was very famous in the southern region. It was said that there were almost no living people in the place where he lived, only horrible zombies, and this frightened Wang Qiao when he thought about it. And although these zombies were more trustworthy than those companions who could stab him in the back at any moment, the guy was so thoughtful that it didn't go unnoticed by his girlfriend. She was worried about Wang Qiao. He smiled at her, but still kept thinking about the zombie king, hoping he wouldn't show up so early. Li Yanjin could absolutely clear a path with his strength, no matter what stones it was made of. He would simply lift his foot, and the wall would fall like cardboard. And thanks to these shortcuts, they're pretty fast. A large and gloomy city unfolded before them, and even the stars did not make it warmer. Li Yanjin could no longer track those rats. Apparently those zombies were there to delay the guys so that the others would have time to escape. Zhao Yingyuan was injured and needed treatment. And besides, Wang Qiao wanted to continue searching for this group of people. The power behind Lian Jianzhou and the others should also be utilized. Because of this, Lian Jianzhou offered Wang Qiao to return to the base with them. In this situation, every awakened person was a force, and the Bureau simply couldn't refuse to not accept the guys. Wang Qiao, after analyzing the whole situation and the pros and cons of this proposal, finally decided that he would go with Lian Jianzhou and take Zhao with him. Lian had already managed to send his coordinates to the station, and the Bureau should have already flown out to get them. Pretty quickly, a large helicopter was landing toward them. Zhao Yingyuan had completely fallen asleep during this time and was placed on the bunk. Captain Lian ordered his subordinates to engage the logistics team to finish the job and scour the surrounding area for survivors. Wang Qiao still hadn't given up hope that his sister was quite possibly alive, and he hoped that she would wait for him. On the desk in his office, he could see that the first phase of the experiment on his sister had been successful, initially awakening her abilities. Su Lan had already regained consciousness and of course realized what had happened, and he was extremely displeased that this woman had stunned him. Who gave her the nerve to do that? But all their arguments were interrupted by a call that no one was happy about. Su Lan received a call from his boss who was disappointed in him. Su Lan tried to justify himself, but his boss wasn't interested in hearing his excuses, and a special service was watching them. The guys are gonna have to hide for a while. Avari's ability was best suited for mobility, so he would work with Bram to replenish it this time. His ability would be important to them in the future. Given that the world was in turmoil, the boss believed that the special security service would soon run out of steam. Su Lan and Yin Zheng were ordered by the boss to be in charge of preparing the second phase of the experiment, and he really hoped that the same mistakes would not be repeated. The next day, Wang Qiao and Lian Jian decided to practice, and Lian could appreciate Wang Qiao's destructive power, which had reached the flood level. Perhaps with this ability, he can put his name in the directory of high potential abilities. Only, Wang Qiao had never even heard of such a guidebook, but he wanted to know. The High Potential Aptitude Handbook was a list of Class 5 and above abilities. Everyone had a sensory field, and the awakened were those who were more sensitive to it. There have been gifted individuals who can operate with multiple sensory fields simultaneously, and once awakened in them, special abilities and their attributes will be very difficult to determine. Although the abilities of multisensory domains may not be more powerful than those of single sensory domains. However, in most cases, multisensory domains result in more complex and powerful abilities, or abilities with high potential. For example, one could take Lian Zhen's Blood Berserk power. This ability overcame the two domains of perception of manipulation and spirituality. In short, it is not the number of domains that matters, but the ability to combine them. Now it wasn't so surprising to our hero that when he used Lu Wo and Zhao Yingyuan's strength, it seemed as if he was using them just as normally as his hand. Although when he sometimes used Zhao's power, he felt a negative feeling in his body. It was quite possible that it was because her ability didn't fuse with his other two abilities. It was not a matter of binding all powers without fear, but of choosing those that could be fused together. In this way, it was possible to create the strongest abilities. Apparently, this was the real power of the Doomsday binding system. Just as Wang Qiao expected, right now, the Bureau was now searching the city for zombies that were acting in an organized manner. But did he really think that it was that group that could control the zombies? Wang Qiao wasn't sure, but it was quite possible that this was the only clue they might have. Because of that, one could only hope that Wang Qiao was wrong. Otherwise, it would be very scary if there was a person who could control these crazy people. Somehow they reached a huge abandoned apartment where a woman's silhouette could be seen. And our hero recognized this painfully familiar silhouette. Was it really his mom, or was he imagining it? But shouldn't she was supposed to be safe? Perhaps he really just imagined it after all. Wang Qiao couldn't imagine how he would look into his mother's eyes when she found out that her daughter was in danger or dead. Meanwhile, Zhao Yinyuan was resting in her chamber and was passionately drawing something. Wang Qiao, as soon as he finished his test, he went to his friend's house to visit her. The first thing he wondered about was what the girl was drawing. And what was his surprise when he saw himself there? The poor guy was embarrassed. Apparently he didn't expect someone to draw his self-portrait, especially such a beautiful one. Zhao Yingyuan's health was already much better, and she felt fine, even back when Luo Wo stopped the bleeding. But the doctor didn't want to let her go for some reason. And all her free time she was drawing portraits of Wang Qiao, which seemed strange to the guy. It was already close to evening when Wang Qiao had an appointment to meet with Lian Jianzhou at his apartment. Lian Jian found some information for our hero about the gang that was here. He just wanted to see it right away and hoped it was inexpensive. Of course he could, although it was classified information. But the Bureau wanted Wang Qiao to join them. It was a kind of goodwill gesture. The bureaus were like the forerunners of the Six Senses Society. If Wang Qiao could join them, the Bureau would be a blessing to his family for a long time. And on the contrary, Wang Qiao was afraid that he would lose a lot of freedom of action, but when the entire city fell, then all the official forces would leave the south, and he would have every chance to escape. In the end, Wang Qiao had of course accepted the offer and would have another test tomorrow. But as Lian said, he didn't have to worry about it. Because for those who were at the flood level, it was just like a walk. After all, our hero will definitely not be harmed by joining the Bureau. And next he will learn about the Six Senses Society, which Lian Jian will tell him about. This was something that Wang Qiao had been wanting to know about for a long time. After all, he had only heard about this society superficially. The mysterious organization behind these guys was called the Society of the Six Senses. Wang Qiao had always believed that the Six Senses Society was a special security service. But how did they become the organization that kidnapped his sister? It turned out that this society was an international group of evil awakened ones who often kidnapped civilians for force-related experiments. And the specific case was described in a document Wang Qiao was reading. But he didn't have time to finish reading. His phone rang. It has been reported that someone has been found after all. The logic behind the actions of one group of survivors was strange, and there were suspicions that someone was behind it after all. Wang Qiao immediately sent out the coordinates of where to go, and he decided to leave Zhao Yingyuan at the hospital. But the girl didn't think so. She had just thrown off her pajamas and was ready to go with him, and there was no arguing about it. Well, if she was fine, Wang Qiao simply couldn't resist her march or argue with this beast. There was really something wrong with these zombies. Their attacks seemed to follow a tactical pattern of sneak attacks. The Bureau's team was caught off guard and suffered heavy casualties, with only 3 survivors including him. The driver tried to drive in such a way that it was possible to parallel and destroy the zombies, which constantly tried to surround the car. At last, the driver brought our boys to a place where they were to be quite sorted out. But he had a request to make to them if it turns out to be true that these zombies were manipulated, with the purpose of killing his teammates, the man asked that Wang Qiao kill the manipulator. Wang Qiao was in no hurry to promise anything, only saying that he would try his best to do so. He still had no idea what he would have to face to promise anything. At the same time, a conscious man could be seen struggling against 2 zombies, having killed quite a few before. His legs were already shaking from fear or exhaustion. He was just watching from the sidelines, as if it were some kind of entertainment. His name was Boer. He stated to the man that he had to kill those 2 zombies in front of him, and then he would be free. Avari showed up to the storm. Turns out they have a new target, a group of 20 survivors. Still, the man failed to defeat the 2 zombies and was finished. But he was so close to victory. And Storm was going to have to make things quick this time, and infect the survivors, not like before. The Six Senses Society could have taken them all, but they lost a lot of zombies and had to let 3 go. Bure didn't try to contradict Avari. He considered him a captain, and was willing to do whatever he wished.